Hey guys, welcome back to Chat with the Mindful Beekeepers. I'm Natalie B. I'm the host of the Natural Beekeeping Corner on the Hive Drive, and I'm a Texas A&M Master Beekeeper. I work with Les Crowder. He wrote the book Tabar Beekeeping Organic Practices for Honeybee Health. And together we have over 60 years of experience on all kinds of hives, and we can help you out with your questions. So got everybody coming in through either YouTube or the Zoom meeting. And feel free to ask your questions in the comments. Les is up and with us. And I don't know what you wanted to talk about. Welcome back, Les, and thanks for joining us and sharing your wisdom as usual. What is the theme that you wanted to discuss tonight?
Oh, I had two things. One practical.
Us and sharing your. Hang on. I'm sorry, I've got. What is the theme that you wanted to discuss tonight? The sound is up. There you go. Go for it.
I had two things on my mind. One sort of practical, and one about the article that you sent about treatment-free being and death to the bees and so forth. And I keep thinking we finally killed that demon, but it keeps resurrecting. And so the practical thing is something that I've noticed the last few days, looking at bees. We had bees that expanded pretty strong and made quite a bit of honey this spring. And then as summer came on and the flowers diminished, some of the bees contracted to no brood whatsoever and dropped their population way down. And they backfilled with honey as they did that. They didn't leave themselves any room to lay eggs, for the queen to lay eggs. And once the heat diminished and it rained a little bit, we needed to rain more, but we'll take what we got. They started putting out a little bit of a brood nest, but some of them got so small, they were near their critical mass, and they had to abandon comb to wax moths and hive beetles. And the problem with a summer dearth is that when we have a winter dearth and the bees abandon comb, it's too cold for the wax moths to do anything about it. They can't eat the comb because they can't move, they're too cold. But in the summer dearth, the wax moths can clean up. So I've had several hives that were building, had a pretty good queen laying, but their outmost combs on either end were being eaten by hive beetles and wax moths because they contracted too much. And now they're just starting to finally kick back. I had to take some of those combs out and basically just get rid of them because they weren't good for anything. There may be a little bit of wax to help the bees get back to something they could protect because they couldn't protect it when they got too low.
And small hive beetles as well, right? We had some a couple that had some small hive beetles taking over, and then they got robbed and all that good stuff. So a couple of colonies succumbed to that. But that's what happens when you have when you manage over 300, probably close to 350. That's kind of what happens. You can't keep them all alive. It's kind of a tough call, right, Les?
Yeah, and the thing is, by cutting them down, that gives them less to protect, and now they're building back up. So I think those that survived, we lost a few, not very many, but a few. And the ones that we kept are the ones we need to keep. And that again just shows Mother Nature doing what Mother Nature has done for thousands or millions of years, right? That's adaptation. That's survival of the fittest. And if they cut down too much, and couldn't come back. They weren't fit enough to come back, and I hate to see them go, but then again, they need to do something else.
So here are some of the things that I've done, and I think Les, you can chime in and say what you think about this. But when I have colonies like that that are that had too much comb, or that are struggling because of them not being able to protect that comb, and some of the secondary pests, which is what small hive beetles and wax moth larvae are, I like to compress them into a small box, whether it's a Langstroth 5-frame nuke or a top bar hive nuke, which is a little bit larger, but we have some that are like 5-6 combs. And I like to compress them. You can compress them even severely in some cases. Having bees, overflowing is better for them to be able to recover and protect their resources and clean up what's going on. But the other aspect of that is I like to use, especially for the Langstroth, because we don't have those much for the top bars. We probably should, but it's kind of harder to move. But for Langstroth, which are already struggling with the shape in the frames and all the stuff, I like to put them in what we call the thick nukes, which is 2-inch lumber. And we have talked about that at the bee school, that provides a lot of thermal mass and really prevents those huge variations in temperatures, those huge deltas, and kind of levels the conditions into the box. So that's something to keep in mind. By the way, hey, hi Deborah, she's dialing in from Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us. And hi everybody, I've got Aiden, I've got Brad, our apprentice, Kathy, I've got Dwayne, another apprentice, Ray, Richard. It's nice to see you guys, Sarita and Larry, Sherry Lane, and Ted. I think you might be new, so it's nice to have you. If you guys have questions, I want to remind you to use the chat window to ask those, and or because we're a small group, feel free to jump in and ask your questions as well. Same thing for YouTube live. If you want to ask your questions there on the commentary, we can do that. And Les, before we jump back around, actually, tell me what you think about those thick insulated smaller hives.
Yeah, anything that helps them insulate from the outside temperature, whether it be from the heat or the cold. Because if it's hot, they're trying to keep it cool. If they're in a thin little box with drafts, they can't keep it cool enough. And if it gets cold, then they can't keep it warm enough. One thing I was just writing about was what I call overexposure. When I go into a beehive, I try to open a few top bars. I give them time to because when you open a couple of top bars, right away that's like, oh my gosh, we're under attack. If you leave it sit for a few seconds and don't just keep rummaging through, they calm right down, because to them a few seconds is like half an hour to us. They're faster than we are. So they adapt to the new situation pretty quickly. And then if you move combs, remember that you're exposing honey and brood to the air temperatures and robber bees and parasitic wasps or whatever. So if you kind of keep them together, kind of tight, so they can keep the temperature, because if you're exposing brood, they're trying to keep brood at a certain high humidity and a very carefully designed temperature for maximum growth and survival. As soon as you take a comb out, you're exposing that brood to the ambient air temperature and humidity, which might be really terrible. I've had brood in New Mexico. I took out the graft, I went to lift a larvae, and it was stuck flat like a pancake on the bottom of the cell because it dried out before I got to it. It was dead. So sometimes when you take the brood out under very severe conditions, you're killing that brood. And that's something to keep in mind. So that's why we need to keep our hive manipulations fairly brief, keep them close together, take a comb out, look at it, put it up next to the comb you just took out, right up next to it, so that they can try to maintain temperature of the brood on that interface. And then that's why when I'm going in a hive, if they have food, they have good brood, I'm done. I don't need to tear the hive all to pieces and just investigate the heck out of it. As long as I know they have food and good brood, I'm done. I may rearrange if there's drone cells next to an expanding brood nest. This time of the year, they're trying to raise workers. They're not going to raise drones. I may rearrange the comb on either end, but I don't take the brood nest apart. I don't need to find the queen. Keep them together because otherwise you're punishing them with what you might call overexposure to the ambient air. And that's just being, and that makes them meaner, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Yeah,
start damaging brood, the brood cries out with pheromones and the bees get upset. So overexposure also makes the beekeeping less pleasant for the beekeeper because now you got bees hitting your veil and threatening you all the time because you're damaging their life, their life force. Remember, the brood is the future of the colony. The bees are constantly dying and have to be replenished. And when you threaten that, you're threatening, it's like you're choking or strangling the colony. It can't breathe.
Yes, that's something to keep in mind every time we go in. There might be unintended consequences, and we need to be mindful of how long and how disruptive we are to the colony. Brad is mentioning there's been those have been some of his issues. The backfilling, well, some of his issues have been backfilling of the brood's nest. And as suggested, he placed some comb in the middle, and it seems they were able to rebound. And I'm assuming you mean drawn worker comb, because that's what they need to make more bees. And then he pulled extra frames that were void of bees and added them back later when they expanded. And if it's completely dry, you can get away with storing it in a light ventilated area as long as there's plenty of airflow between the combs. But as soon as there is humidity, your wax moths tend to go and move in anyway. So the safest at that point is to freeze them if you have the freezer space. And then pull them out when as needed. And what I would protect more than anything is some of the food combs if you have to, but mostly the drawn worker comb, and just kind of like what Les was mentioning, kind of like potentially pull out some of those dry resources they're not protecting to kind of allow the bees to better protect what's in the hive. Deborah says a beekeeper friend of his. Did you want to say something, Lex, by the way?
Well, I was just going to mention that backfilling is what caused them to not, they can't build comb until they get enough bees. So if they can expand a little bit and raise a goodly little batch of brood, now they can start building new comb and moving honey and taking care of their business. They got so small and backfilled themselves into a corner in some cases. Yeah, that's a good observation.
So there's a delicate balance, right? I mean, you want to also watch the add back when it's time and they're running out of space, because if they run out of space, they can't make any more babies, which means their population might decrease, which means they might potentially even feel congested and swarm even in the fall, right? So just kind of be mindful of that. Deborah says a beekeeper friend of hers is having a lot of trouble with European hornets. Any thoughts on how to deal with that, Les?
Well, hornets can be a terrible thing. And I have seen them totally kill beehives. And I have found that putting out traps in the spring, which I know that can't be done now, but the traps you can buy, that there's plastic or glass ones. I like the glass ones. They tend to be yellow. And you put a substance in them. It smells bad, like rotting meat. Keeping in mind that many hornets are also carnivores, and they're attracted to rotting meat. And once they go in, they fall in, drown. Now they add to the allure of the smell by their rotting bodies. And I've had them be very effective. I've put several out in hung them in trees up near the bee yards. And it's particularly helpful in the spring because hornets are semi-social. They overwinter as individual queens.
Mhm.
And if you catch those queens in the spring, they never start a nest. They die and never start a nest. Once they start a nest, they will leave. Now you've got to kill off the workers. And if a hive of hornets has progressed, there can be thousands, like 2, 3, 4,000 workers. So now you're fighting a lot harder battle because they got ahead of you. And the other thing is reduce the entrance, rubber screens, whatever you can do to help them protect making sure there's only one entrance. Because a lot of times length with boxes or top bar hives have leaks that we're not particularly concerned about. But with hornet attacks, you have to be concerned about any possible leak because the hornets will find them.
Mm-hmm.
That'll just be one more area of vulnerability to the beehive.
Can we use rubber screens less against the European hornets?
Rubber screens?
Rubber,
Oh, yeah.
rubbing.
Yes, definitely. Yes, the rubber screens help a lot because the hornets want to fly straight in. They don't. Now and if you give the bees a way to protect a little tiny space, the hornets can overtake it. Hornets want to catch the bees and they want to bite the bees right where the abdomen meets the thorax. It's a very thin little tube that connects the abdomen to the thorax. And they bite the bees right there and clip that tube, killing the bee, of course. And then they use the abdomen as food. And then they slowly decimate the hive. If they have to go in to where robbers are head first, and there's not room for them to bite them on their thorax, that invalidates their attack. So rubber screens help anything to reduce the entrance down to a very small entrance that the bees can protect with their bodies. Yeah.
Here's another, we might not want to use this one, but another tip. Some of bee races have developed some defense mechanisms around against hornets and wasps, and they use feces from mammals, basically, that they'll come and plaster on the front of the hive to basically camouflage it. And apparently it's very efficient, but I don't know if we want to use that. What are your thoughts on that, Les?
I'm not afraid of like cow manure.
Right.
There's lots of people use it for cooking fuel. I pick it up all the time and use it as smoker fuel. It doesn't really bother me. I know it bothers Jamaicans, by the way.
Oh, it
Jamaicans
does.
are very fastidious, tidy, and to them that would be terrible. I happen to know a few Jamaicans, and I live with some. But yeah, I'm not too worried about that. But I've read about that more with Asian bees. I'm not. I guess it must be African Apis mellifera. I'll have to look that up and see which bees
I
do
think
that.
you're right. I think there was some Asian bees, so I'm not sure which one it was, but doesn't cost much to try, I guess, if you don't care about the way your hive looks, because it does look like speckled and just kind of like they literally flung it at the front door.
I've also heard of bees that attack very large hornets and form a cluster around them and heat the cluster up until they cook the hornet. That's with these big, like the murder hornets that are, quite large. They can actually kill them.
So Deborah says something that's very relevant throughout the entire season and throughout the entire year and against several pests, pretty much all of them actually. I wonder if the small entrance also reduces the smell of the hive and makes it less likely to attract the hornets. I keep small entrance in my hive all year long. So, and then we do that as well, Les. We close down the entrances and adapt it to the minimum needed for the flow of traffic, meaning if there's just a few bees going in and out, then it's like a pinky finger worth for them to go in and out. Of course, if you have a bustling colony that's super large, you don't want to completely, smother them either. So you might open a couple of the round entrances on the top of hive and just put it on your larger opening on your entrance reducer. What are your thoughts on that, Les? Do you think that prevents the smell from escaping and inviting pests?
Well, Tom Seeley did a study where he shook swarms. First, he determined that they liked smaller boxes than we assumed, about 10 gallons or 40 liters. But then he took boxes of their preferred volume with different size entrances. And he found that they liked a really very small entrance, that the bees preferred cavities with small entrances down towards the bottom. And he found that about 6 centimeters squared. So that's a pretty small entrance. Mm-hmm. And they can then propylize that as time and temperature and flight design capacity goes. Yeah, there's Brad holding up a
disc entrance reducer. Yes.
So, when we invented the Langstroth hive with that nearly 1 inch by 16-inch wide opening, I just blasted it wide open. Mm-hmm. And that was never designed by bees. That was designed by beekeepers who wanted to make a lot of honey and figured they better let the bees be sure and get in and out fast and bring in all that honey.
Don't get me started on that. Yeah, because there's a lot of decisions that have been made in conventional beekeeping, commercial beekeeping especially, over the years that were meant for mostly the beekeepers and kind of did away with some of the wisdom that the older beekeepers were using, thinking they would outsmart the bees, one of which is the foundation, which is a lot larger, the fact that it's made out of plastic or even commercial wax, in the imposition of the cell sizes that the bees use for their bird's nest as well as their honey. And it's just not one size fits all. So it has had some serious consequences on the health of the colonies and their stress levels. But
I think Deborah's observation of keeping a small entrance, I think that's very wise. Mm-hmm. And all of us should watch that we don't over ventilate and make them overly vulnerable to pests, parasites by over opening too wide of an entrance.
And that includes cross ventilation and cracking your lid open on Langstroth, or opposing entrances, just kind of creating a draft that's harder for them to control the conditions inside the bird's nest, and also the screen bottom boards, which are completely leaving the front door open, making it hard for them, and they struggle and go through a lot of resources trying to maintain homeostasis, and it's just kind of decreases their vitality basically and their harvest. So that's something to keep in mind.
Right.
And Brad was showing the round disc entrance reducer, and then you have a round entrance on the woodenware. And then so if you sometimes kind of turn that desk, you end up with like this shape, because the circles intersect. And so that is even smaller than what those circles can allow. So that's something to keep in mind. Deborah, they're talking about harvesting honey. Is everybody harvesting honey at this time in Central Texas? Les, would you harvest honey at this time of the year, going into fall and looking at what's going to happen with winter, making sure they have all their stores and enough to survive the dearth?
If they have quite a bit of honey and 9 combs full of brood with a lot of honey in it, I would take down to 9. I wouldn't go below that. I don't know. I think we're still in for a honey flow, but you never know till it happens. And we really need a rain. So I would be careful. But there's nothing wrong with taking some honey. In some ways, taking it now before they get real robby. Like if you wait till there's nothing blooming and then go to harvest honey, they get into robbing so quick and so furious. That's no fun. So if you take it now while they're not robbing, it's a much more pleasant experience than waiting until the bloom is completely over.
Yes. So those things are, it kind of depends on the colony. It depends on the forage that's coming in. It depends on the population and the amount of existing stores. You want to leave them more than enough to get through. You want to be erring on the side of caution. But if really, truly they have a lot of extra, I mean, there's nothing wrong with harvesting some honey at this point. Just don't take their honey more than you should, because they might run short through the winter, and that might be catastrophic. And it's really hard to feed a colony in the winter. That's not ideal at all. So
yeah, so right now I'm already saying these hives are going to make it through the winter.
Yeah,
it's even though we still got a few months, we have no idea what those months are going to bring. So I wouldn't never cut them below that after solstice. In the spring, you can make divides and figure they got time to build up. But now we don't know if they're going to build up much at all. So if they hold their own, great. And then we'll see, get them to the next spring.
Right. And then there's another option potentially is to, when you do pull out those combs of honey, put them in the freezer if you have the space, and then assess going into winter if they have enough or not. And then you can always pull it out. What you don't want to do is harvest and extract, and then it's harder to feed that to them. So if you are really wanting to try to harvest some, but are wanting to prevent a lack of food for the winter, freeze those frames. That is another option.
Right. And I've had some people, because in the past beekeeping was all about honey production. People didn't really seem to care as much about bees as how much honey did they have. And then that shifted. And now I see people that, I don't care to get any honey. I just want to take care of the bees, which is noble and nice. There's nothing wrong with getting honey for your family. I mean, I just bottled some up that we had harvested from a class, and my girls really appreciate it. It's delicious, and it's nutritious, and it's wonderful. But you just have to balance. Life is just nothing but balance. And we got to make sure we take care of the bees so that we have them for next year and next year and next year. And getting towards the other angle of this conversation, the idea being that we know that if we take good care of the bees, they're going to be alive without treatments for many, many years, because we've already got them through many years without treatments. And that's what we want. We want those bees to thrive. And the last thing we want to do is take all their honey and have to feed them something. And especially if we resorted to sugar syrup, now we've robbed something beautiful, replaced it with something, and we did a disservice to our bees.
It's like soda instead of fruits, kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Deborah says, do you have a recommendation for an adjustable entrance for Langstroth? Well, the entrance reducers are one. You get a couple settings on that. So she's got that standard wooden one, but the small is a bit smaller than the 6 square inch in centimeter. You can use the round entrance reducers. There's the big one, like Brad was showing, and then there's the smaller ones. They made them out of plastic or metal, and then you can just kind of drill. So put the Langstroth on the solid bottom board that's attached potentially even to the bottom brood box. With no other entrance than a hole that you can drill on the bottom of that brood box. And then you can put those disc entrance reducers and just kind of adjust that way. You could do what we do with the topper hives, basically, with the Langstroth. It's actually very convenient when you have to transport your colonies, because with the entrance reducers and the stacked up boxes, sometimes it's all kind of like, it can detach itself, or it's hard to put something in the entrance for them to breathe yet to make sure they're locked in. So there's something to consider. Just drill a hole in the bottom of your brood box and put it on a solid bottom board that doesn't have the little elevation, and just put an entrance reducer on that. So that's, something to consider. And then Deborah, she was asking if she could send a link to her friend. So all the recordings are being posted to YouTube, and if they want to join us live, they can do that on YouTube at Be Mindful, and then they can also join us via the Zoom link. And if they want older recordings, they're all on our Instagram account at Be Mindful Honey Farms. So a lot of various talks. Some of them were really, really interesting. So I encourage you to kind of take a look at their Instagram account as well. Brad says, I use the 4-inch slot till winter, then I reduce if I need down to the number 1 hole, to the 1-inch hole. Aiden says, what was the reference to 9 bars? I missed that. Is it for the Tabar nucleus?
Well, that's how many combs I leave them for winter here in the Austin, San Antonio area. And in Mexico, I left them 12. So where you have longer winters, you need to leave them more honey. Because they do have to keep warm. And that's the thing, we can get by here. We've gotten by here on 4 combs. So it's pretty dangerous. They might run out, but it is possible. It's not that hard for them to get by our winter here. Actually, our summers almost harder on them than our winters. June, well, particularly July and August, can be worse for the bees in this area than December, January. But so it really depends on where you are. If you have a long, cold winter, you might leave them 15 and then see how they come through. And if they have honey left over in the spring, 3 or 4 combs, well, you could have taken a bit more. But it's always better to leave a bit too much and learn that you could have left them more. You could have taken them than it is to not to take too much and learn that you should have left more and now you lost the bees. So that really depends on where you are. But here in Austin, I leave them 9 combs, 7 to 9 combs. If they're on 7, I feel like they're okay. But if I can, I'll leave them 9.
And Aiden, to specify, that's total, not just honey, right?
Right.
In a Tabar hive. And it's
bird with a bit of honey, and then often a fair amount of just honey, but yeah, they don't need to have it all packed with honey. Shouldn't have it all packed.
So Aiden says, great, that really helps. And by the way, that's all on 2-inch lumber hives and Tabar hives. And I want to remind you that if you're making your own, I would recommend the 2-inch depth on the bars as well, as opposed to the splitting them in 2, because wood is expensive. That makes for thinner bars, which is fine. But personally, I feel a little bit better when it's on the really thick bars. It's harder to transport everywhere, right? It takes a lot more space and it's a lot heavier, but I believe in the added insulation it provides just above the brood's nests.
Yeah, and if you want to insulate, you can put a blanket. You want something that absorbs moisture. I don't really like foam plastic so much, but if you can put, if you have 2-inch bars, that makes them 1 3/8 wide by 1 1/2 inch tall. Just remember which, because I don't put cleats on my bars, so I could get them confused. But I've gotten after years of practice, very quick to recognize which way they go. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage.
Yes.
You need to just use up a little space and they're not building there. Turn it sideways and let it be 1 1/2 inches wide to tighten things up. And yeah, it makes it harder to transport, but I hope you don't have to transport your bees very much. That's no fun.
No, it's no fun for the bees either. But I do that as well. I will flip the bar because it's taller than it's wide. The 1 3/8 of an inch is narrower than the depth of the bar. So that really makes for really practical adjustments without having to have shims or spacers. So keep that in mind.
But
Let's,
I'm going to add to that. It's nice to have those shims and spacers. I keep a supply in my truck. That because invariably you open up a beehive, put all the top bars right back in the same order,
yeah.
and they don't fit like they did when you took it apart. But if you have a shims and spacers in a little collection, you can find the one that makes it fit pretty tight but not too tight, and keep moving.
Yeah, and that's for the top bars.
Yeah.
The Langstroth, it's always the same. What you end up having to have with you is a lot of frames and a lot of extra boxes, just because in case you need to pull something out, a comb of honey or a comb of brood to give to someone else, and it's just kind of a little bit more cumbersome. But there's no need for a shim or anything like that. I want to say hi to James on the YouTube channel, as well as Suburban Sawbuster. And good evening to you both. Thank you for joining us. If you guys have questions on the YouTube channel, just make sure to type it up in the comments in the chat, and then we'll address them. We're talking about, what's the theme today, Les? I forget.
Well, we started off, we were going to talk about the kind of the attack on treatment-free.
Oh, you're talking about okay. So I don't like being negative, but I sent to Les a article that was published in the Bee Culture magazine for this month. That's called Treatment Free. Treatment Free is the Only Way to Be by John Miller, who is the migratory beekeeper, a multi-generational migratory beekeeper at the heart of the More Than Honey documentary. And if you haven't watched that documentary, I really encourage you to go watch. I warn you though, the part that is describing how John Miller that does his splitting before the season starts over is really disheartening. So, but that's the same guy that wrote the article that was published in the Bee Culture magazine, and it was quite filled with gratuitous insults and grievances and cliches, a lot of cliches and things. And it basically was saying that treatment-free beekeepers were parasitizers of and the most ignorant among us. So it was throwing a lot of talk about mudslinging. We were talking about that earlier. There was a lot of mudslinging. But what were your thoughts on that, Les? I mean, how do you react to something like this?
I've dealt with it for 40 years, back in the days of antibiotics and then miticides. And, there's been a couple of those years where I couldn't keep bees alive without doing something because the mites were just so bad. But when USDA, Animal Research Service, comes out with mite-resistant bees, and all the beekeepers of South America, Central America, the Caribbean, Puerto Rico have quit treating for mites and hive beetles. It's amazing to me that these people, they're so based in fear. And that kind of leads to anger. Anger always stems from fear. You're never truly angry at something unless you're not a little bit afraid of it in some way. And so they're saying that your hive, for instance, Natalie, that is in the Warre can't possibly be alive. And yet it is and has been for 8 years in a row. And
It is thriving.
We've got numerous hives like that have just, and we've done mite counts. They got a little higher and they went down. And the one thing about this summer dearth that we had is sure did in the mites. The mites really took a hit when the brood took a hit. And so our bees know how to handle mites. And we're very confident. I'm not the least bit. I mean, it's aggravating to read that I'm lying when I know that I'm not. I know that Natalie's bees are not lying to me. The Brad's bees are not lying to him. he's kept bees for years, several years now, without treating. And these people tell you, well, they can't be done. All the bees alive are the bees we've protected, except for Tom Seeley's, which is somehow, because he's a PhD entomologist, he
He's
must
okay.
have some magical situation going on up there. But us low life non-PhDs must be lying. Bees can live without us. Absolutely. Bees may be able to live a lot better without us. A lot of what we do interferes with what they would like. When the mites first came, it was really tough. The mites way overpopulated the beehives, and they killed a lot of bees.
In the late 80s.
You're right. And so the bees went down, and then the mites, of course, died because they didn't have any host. And that's slowly gotten into a balance. And now a lot of bees are very mite resistant, and a lot of mites have, I believe, turned out the mites that survived were the mites that didn't overpopulate and tuned their reproduction to Apis mellifera's reproductive cycle. So we finally got a balance, and I'm very calm and confident in that balance. And I don't worry about mites anymore. Occasionally seen them in classes or in our bee inspections. There's a mite. Okay, hi mite. You're not my problem. I don't make them my enemy anymore. I don't make my enemy the hive beetle. Bees can handle the hive beetle. I don't have to worry about the hive beetle. If the bees collapse due to a drought, then the hive beetle may take advantage. And that's a case of where it was probably good to take a little bit of honey before the hive beetle took it.
Yeah, so
well, there's really no fear. You know, when these people put these articles out, makes it sound like, oh my gosh, if you don't treat your bees,
right,
they're all going to die. And many, many beekeepers absolutely know that's not true because they haven't treated for years quite a few hives throughout the Caribbean. I just went back and visited some beekeepers in Jamaica who have never treated their bees, and they've got lots of bees. They're catching swarms all the time and getting more bees, and they've never treated any of them. And then are Jamaican bees somehow superior to American bees? No, it's just that they've already reached that balance because they had to. Jamaica offers an interesting history because Rastafarians form a sort of a quasi-religion that says that they have to eat organic food and they're vegans, but they believe they can eat honey. A lot of vegans believe they shouldn't eat honey, but the Rastafarian vegans believe they can eat honey. So they tend to be beekeepers because they don't want to buy it. And so they're not sure if they buy it, if it's really honey. So a lot of Rastafarian Jamaican beekeepers are organic minded, and they never did want to use Apistan or any treatments. And so their bees got into balance with the mites 10, 20 years ago. And tell them their bees won't live without miticides, and they'll laugh. They have lived for years. They haven't never used miticides. They don't need it. None of us need poison. And the idea that we have to put poison in the beehive to protect our bees, to me, winds up being absolutely the worst idea. Because if it's poisonous enough to kill the mites, it's definitely doing damage to the bees. And it's a crazy idea, but it's driving a lot of our agriculture. And that's why we need to lead the way as treatment-free beekeepers to a non-toxic way of keeping bees, and then a non-toxic way of growing almonds and apples and peaches, etc. and leading toward a more organic agriculture.
Mm-hmm. So that the all other aspect of this is you can read that article the other way around and think that they're talking about two people that are treating, and you can read it completely the opposite. That was interesting. But read the article that Dr. Seeley kind of wrote on tolerance, and you will find those themes of basically that balance also brings tolerance of the past, right? It doesn't matter that there's a certain population in the colony if they've learned to tolerate and just be fine with their presence, that equilibrium matters. And what also matters, in my opinion, is the vitality of the colony. A colony that's strong and very vitally strong, just got a lot of life, that's healthy, is not going to suffer from those issues, whether it be the viruses that they might transmit or the secondary pests. And they'll just be, having the same quantities of the same proportions of mite presence will do nothing to them, where a colony that's struggling, that's unhealthy, that's stressed, will be sent over the edge, if you'd like, and will succumb. And at that point, I think that the expression of some of the problems that the mites bring is more of a symptom of an underlying issue, right? And something wrong with your colony. And if it was right, they wouldn't be, the mites wouldn't be detrimental to them, right?
Right, and that's mites are getting to be relegated to the same category as the wax moths and the hive beetles
As a secondary
as
pest.
secondary pests, because the bees absolutely groom the mites, brood break, force brood breaks to stop mite reproduction, the sensitive hygiene. They have lots of traits to help them resist the mites, and they can handle the mites. And really treating throws everything back. And it makes mites that need to go survive, and it makes bees that need to go survive. And we can't poison our way into a more positive future. We have to biologically attain a fit future. We have to be fit for the future. And the mites, the parasites and the predators are constantly refining and pushing us to higher degrees of fitness. They serve a purpose. They aren't our enemy. They can initially be dangerous, but eventually we overcome them. And there's a constant striving for more excellence because of the pressure they put on us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, mites are not an enemy.
Right.
Bees can handle mites if you let them, give them a chance.
Yeah, it might be hard at first, but they'll reach a balance. And look, this was the same, you're talking about Jamaica, but it's the same in Africa, and even to a certain extent in South America, where people didn't have either access or the means to buy and apply those treatments. So, or even the knowledge on how to do that. So there's just kind of, they had to go through, and they reached a balance way earlier than we are still struggling to reach a balance, because we're still on that chemical treadmill. But I want to circle back real quick to questions we've got accumulating. And Kathy in Houston is asking, if the bars are in the top bar are not 2-inch thick, can you also place a piece of 1-inch plywood on top of the bars and then place a blanket, or place the blanket on top of the bar first, then a piece of 1-inch plywood? And you could do that. I would recommend putting the insulation directly over the bars. And like Les was mentioning earlier, some kind of like a pillow of hay or something on top of the bars will provide some moisture absorption, as well as some insulation right there on top of your bird's nests. So that's definitely something you should consider if you're worried, if you don't have the 2-inch, the 1.5 inch technically thick bars.
In our case, we have a conglomeration of top bars. Some are 2-inch, some are 1-inch, or 1 and a little bit more, or whatever. That we've cut top bars in different rooms, and then we've traded top bars from one hive to the other, so they're all different heights. So in that case, putting the blanket down first, lets it kind of go up and over the bumps and fill in the valleys of the top bars that were smaller than the other top bar next to it. So I would put a blanket down or 2 blankets if you're worried, and then it's easy to take off. I put the hay when I know I'm going to go into a cold winter and I'm done. I've done everything I can do to get them ready for winter. I don't want to open them and break the propolis seal until sometime in February or March. Well, depending, February here. Then I would put a blanket, a bunch of hay on top of that blanket, and a cover over that to keep the hay dry. And that hay is just a good insulating and moisture absorbing layer. But, you know, in Houston, you shouldn't have to worry too much about it because we're not going to get that cold.
That cold.
The blanket would be fine. And then your cover over that.
So, by the way, I want to say hi to Bruce Rodriguez from Swarmstead Bees and Gardening YouTube channel. He and I had a little chat about this. Well, not about the article. He did have a chat that he posted on his YouTube channel this past few days with his review of the whole article. But he and I had a talk last week, and I forget, we talked about a little bit of everything. Treatment-free wide. So if you're interested, go check it out as well. The other thing is Brad says, oh no, Deborah said, we dealt with this with respect to organic gardening for decades. People want to tell you it's impossible, to which I always say, you know, people that say it's impossible should not interrupt those who are doing it. And
Exactly.
I have a little meme with that. It's basically the Wright brothers that kind of start mainstream basically flying with airplanes. They were told they couldn't do it, and if they had listened to the naysayers, where would we be today, right? So it's just kind of do your thing, and if it works for you, that's all that matters. Now, I will say it's very important to start or work with bees or work them into your apiaries, bees that are local survivor stock. If you start with commercially treated queens from Italian genetics from out of state, you're going to struggle. You're fighting an uphill battle. It's better to catch swarms. It's better to let your colonies requeen or bring queens that are local and that are not treated, because they're going to be the most adapted to your local cycles of weather and forage. They're going to be the most resilient. And above all, I would say if you can afford it, just get queens that are from swarm cells as well. They're going to be better than the ones that are grafted and bred by, in a sense, commercial beekeepers. So everything matters. Just kind of pay attention to what you're putting in your beehives.
But biology will rule. In other words, when we use miticides, we are constantly fighting the mites resistant to our miticides. And mites are amazingly resistant. So they've been through apistan, cumaphos, and amitraz. They're getting resistant to all those. So we're fighting nature's resistance when we use those poisons. When we use bees that are resistant to the mite and tolerant of the mite, now we're working with nature's forces. We are not above nature. Nature is truly awesome and amazing. And I love working with nature as part of helping nature with natural selection instead of interfering all the time. Yes. That's why we need survivor stock, because that's nature solving the problem on her own.
Yes. So I will post the link, the channel for Bruce Rodriguez from the Treatment-Free Beekeeping group on Facebook is Swarmstead Bees and Gardening on YouTube, and the chat we had on Treatment-Free Beekeeping was exactly 7 days ago, actually. And then the one where he discussed that article that was published in the Bee Culture magazine is A Sucker's Born Every Minute. It was published 4 days ago, so if you're interested in looking that up. Deborah says, basically, monoculture requires putting bees in such unhealthy circumstances for pollination. And just basically, let's be honest, for the pocketbook of the commercial beekeepers as well. And Brad says, prepare yourself if you watch the More Than Honey documentary, where the author of that article is showing how poorly he treats and handles his bees. Brad actually says what they do to their bees is horrific. And then Deborah says the mites are not going to eradicate the bee because they need them. They need to come to a balance like we have with the bacteria in our own system. Right? Let's talk about that a lot.
Right. The really stupid parasite kills its host. Then it has nowhere to live. Parasites have to balance their reproduction until they can have a thriving host. The mites, the best mites, varroa mites in the world, are mites that let bees thrive, because then they have plenty of hosts. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to let them find their natural balance. I would love to see a study done that measures the mite reproductive rates here in Texas, in the feral bees that we have, and compare it to Apis cerana in China, where they originally came from. Because I bet you'll find that the mites and the feral bees here have toned their reproductive cycles way down so they don't hurt their hosts.
So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing I would say, follow the money. Every time somebody tells you you can't do something, follow the money. What's their motivation? Are they selling bees? Are they selling treated bees? Are they selling treatments? Are they selling queens? What's the motive behind all this, right? For an example, the editor of the Bee Culture magazine is actually Jerry Hayes, who works for Vita Bee Health, which guess what they sell? Treatments for the bees against the mites and all kinds of things.
Right.
So that's the same thing with the research. A lot of the people that are saying you can't do, you have to treat them, they have their pet research projects, their PhD thesis, and they're working on developing products that are meant to be the next silver bullet, and so they can be either famous or rich from selling those or the discoveries they've made. And so just kind of keep in mind a little bit everything's what is everybody's agenda. And luckily we're not trying to sell bees, so we tend to be fairly objective from that standpoint, except that we get on our soapbox, right, guys? We're just very much believers in the treatment-free approach.
Back in the day when we were told we had to use antibiotics all winter to keep the American foul brood at bay. Turns out who made the recommendations? Pfizer, the maker of terramycin, the main antibiotic. So this corporate science isn't real science. It's for-profit, proselytized science.
Jerry Hayes really needs to answer for that drivel, says Bruce from Swarmstead Bees and Gardening. I'm sure he's going to get a lot of backlash and letters and things. So I'm not too worried about the fact that he's probably going to think twice next time, hopefully. But the point is, y'all, it's if you want to keep your bees naturally and sustainably, that's entirely possible. You just need to arm yourself with the right knowledge. It's going to take a lot more understanding of the biology of the honeybee and the pests and the pathogens that plague them. So integrated pest management all the way up to potentially even biochemical intervention, biological intervention, not biochemical, biological intervention, things like using BT for wax moths, and that's just a natural, non-toxic. As far as we're concerned, we don't use it. We stop at the first 3 levels. Educational, know your honeybees, know their cycles, know that those of the pests and pathogens. Cultural, which is really a big one, is using natural comb. It really increases the vitality of the colony and lets them be who they are supposed to be, as well as these local survivor stock queens. That's super important. And then mechanical interventions if you need to. Just make sure you keep small entrances, your equipment is in good standing repair, the doors are not wide open to the pests and pathogens. They are able to maintain homeostasis in their nests through some level of insulation and thermal mass that's going to decrease the variations in temperatures, and don't crack them open wide in the brood's nest so that the propolis vapors and the venom vapors escape, as well as the humidity and the temperatures are disrupted. So I'll keep all that in mind. And if you put all those tools in your toolbox, chances are the bees will be doing just fine as long as there's enough food in the area for them to thrive, right? If you have to if you have to resort to chemical intervention, and I include in chemical intervention essential oils that interfere with pheromones, that stays in the wax, that can coat the gut of the bees and disrupt their microbiome. That includes the so-called organic acids, which organic doesn't mean organic from the grocery stores. You've heard me say that before. It means it's not inorganic. It means it's got certain atoms of hydrogen and carbon in a certain structure. But as I've said before, the naphthalene, the toxic component of Agent Orange, and DDT are all organic. It doesn't mean that it's good for us or for the bees, right? So just keep all that in mind, stack the deck in your favor, in the favor of the bees, and you'll have success keeping your bees naturally and sustainably. Just let them be bees and don't interfere with their cycles or their nature too much. But with that being said, it is 8:33, and we've come to the end of this week's Chat with the Mindful Beekeepers. If you like these talks, just kind of click like on the YouTube channel and subscribe to the channel so you know when we're posting them. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you for all your comments and your questions. I've got, I think we've gone through all of them. Everybody's like, thank you so much, informative, great conversation, many thanks. Les, above all, we thank you for your expertise and your wisdom and the time you spend every week to educate us and share all that, and your philosophy as well, because you are a philosopher in your spare time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathalie, and thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all next week.
We'll see you next week. Have a good evening. Bye.